The moment was quiet when it happened. No shouting, no broken glass, no slammed doors. Just the soft chime of a phone in a warm living room, right as the clock on the wall ticked toward midnight. I was placing 2 champagne flutes on the dining table. Nothing fancy, just simple glass, the kind we'd collected over the years when the screen lit up. I didn't mean to pick it up. It was just there, face up, bright, calling to the silence. The message sat on the lock screen in plain white letters. Baby me and our son are waiting. My chest went still. Not broken, not torn, just still, like a lake right before the ice forms. Richard was across the room adjusting the collar of his shirt in the mirror. He must have seen the way I stopped moving, because he crossed the space in 3 quick steps. He didn't ask what I saw. He didn't explain. He didn't even look ashamed. He just took the phone out of my hand like I had touched something that didn't belong to me. Then he looked at me not as a wife, not as a partner, not as someone he had spent 12 years of life with, but as if I were less. Know your place, he said. His voice didn't even rise, unless you want to end up with nothing. I don't remember much of the next few seconds, just the sound of fireworks going off somewhere in the distance. A neighborhood cheer rising faintly outside. The world celebrating the arrival of a new year. And me standing absolutely still in mine. I didn't yell. I didn't ask who she was. I didn't ask about the boy. I didn't bargain. I didn't break. I just nodded once, set the glasses down, and walked upstairs. I closed the bedroom door softly, like someone ending a prayer. That's where most stories would say I fell apart. But grief didn't flood me. Rage didn't burn me. I didn't even cry. I just sat on the edge of the bed and looked at my hands. Steady, my breathing even. Because this wasn't shock. It was confirmation. I had known about her for 2.5 years. I had known about the child for almost 1. I had known about the promises he made her. The restaurants they sat in, the photographs he kept in a hidden album on his work laptop. I knew the nights when he said he was helping a client with estate paperwork were spent somewhere else entirely. I knew the laughter he saved, the warmth he saved, the softness he saved, none of it was mine anymore. The thing is, I didn't leave then, not because I was weak or afraid or dependent. I stayed because I was preparing. Quietly, patiently, thoroughly. There are things older folks in this country know that younger ones haven't learned yet. You don't swing before you have your feet planted. You don't walk out of a house you helped build without knowing where you'll lay your head next. You don't leave a battle without making sure the other side no longer holds the ground beneath your feet. And I learned those lessons from the man who raised me. My father was a carpenter. Not a wealthy one, not a famous one. But a man who built things that didn't fall down. He taught me how to run numbers, how to understand value, how to measure twice and cut once, how to save quietly, how to never spend what you don't have, how to invest in what grows, not what shines. When I married Richard, he told me it would be simpler if I didn't work. Less complicated, he said. A more traditional marriage. At the time, I thought he meant he wanted to take care of me. But I never stopped working. While he slept at night, I sat at the old roll-top desk my father left me running bookkeeping for local contracting businesses on the side. I learned real estate valuation zoning, changes tax benefits on restoration properties. And when the market dipped, I bought. One small place at first, then another under a different LLC, then another under a trust. A duplex, a corner cafe building, a foreclosed craftsman house that needed love, a small warehouse property that would later lease to a woodworking business. Nothing flashy, nothing anyone would look at twice. But they produced income, they compounded, they grew. I never needed Richard's money. In fact, most of the accounts he spent so freely from, they were seated with mine. He thought I was just good with household budgeting. No, I was building. A life, a foundation, a future, a way out. So when he told me to know my place, it didn't break me. It clarified everything. My place was not beside him anymore. It was beyond him. I changed clothes, packed one small bag, my keys, my identification, my father's old watch. Nothing else. I didn't need a scene. I didn't need closure. I didn't need answers to questions that were already answered months ago. I walked past Richard on the stairs. He didn't stop me. He thought I was calming down. Thought I'd sleep it off. Thought tomorrow I'd pretend nothing happened. He didn't know I had already moved ownership of the house, the cars, the joint accounts, the brokerage portfolios. the retirement rollover, the cabin rental property. All legally, all quietly, all properly documented, all without needing his permission. He didn't know I had been preparing for this night. He didn't know I had been ready. I walked out into the cold New Year air, the distant fireworks still going, the sky bright with bursts of color. Somewhere families were toasting to new beginnings. So was I. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, with the sound of my car door closing and the engine starting, and the soft, steady certainty that I had finally stepped back into my own life. I didn't go far that night, just to a small roadside inn off Highway 70, the kind with brown carpet and coffee that tastes like cardboard. I didn't need comfort, I just needed distance. The room smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old air conditioning. I sat on the edge of the bed just as I had done at home earlier, hands resting quietly in my lap. I could hear cars passing in the dark outside, a few fireworks still popping in the distance, their echoes thinning into silence. I wasn't shaking. Most people think heartbreak shows up like a storm, loud, violent, impossible to ignore. But mine had been weathering for years, small, quiet cracks forming under soft words and fading glances. There was no explosion left to have. Just release. I lay back, stared at the ceiling, and let my mind drift to where everything had started. Not with Richard, not with betrayal, but with my father. He was the kind of man you might miss if you weren't paying attention. Soft-spoken, slow-moving, hands always stained with sawdust or varnish. He didn't talk about love in grand speeches. He showed it by building a porch railing that didn't splinter, by fixing a neighbor's gate without being asked, by waking up early, so I'd always have warm biscuits before school. When I was young, he sat me beside him in his workshop. He'd hand me sandpaper trimmed into half sheets and say, "Go slow. Wood listens when you're patient." I remember asking him once, "Why don't you buy one of those big electric sanders? It's faster." He smiled, but not at me, more at the wood in his hands. "Fast doesn't last, Helen. You want it to last, you do it right." He wasn't talking about furniture. He was talking about living. Later, after Mom passed, it was just the two of us. We didn't talk much about grief, but we didn't need to. Grief lives in the work you do to stay standing. He kept building. I kept learning. By the time I was 25, I knew how to read zoning paperwork better than most realtors. I knew how to calculate renovation profit margins from a walkthrough. I knew which contractors cut corners and which ones treated their work like art. But more importantly, I knew how to survive quietly. That's what Richard never understood. He saw kindness and mistook it for softness. He saw silence and mistook it for submission. He saw my willingness to support him and thought it meant I needed him. But I had been raised by a man who taught me that a gentle hand and a strong spine can live in the same body. Richard didn't come from that kind of world. He grew up chasing impressions cars that were just a little too expensive clothes that signaled status conversations that were always about how things looked rather than how they felt. He loved the idea of being admired. And I did admire him once. When we first met, he laughed easily. He held doors open. He talked about building a home that felt like a sanctuary. I believed him. Maybe he believed himself at the time. But somewhere along the way, admiration turned to performance. He didn't want a sanctuary anymore. He wanted an audience. And I learned to step back. Not because I was afraid, but because I listened. I watched the shift. I watched the distance grow. And when the warmth was gone, when the small compliments stopped, when the late nights began, I didn't cling. I observed. I prepared. My father used to say, "Some folks don't show you who they are. They show you who they think you want." Wait long enough and the truth will walk in wearing its own shoes. Richard's truth had been walking toward me for years. So when I sat in that motel room, the thin blanket pulled to my chin, I wasn't replaying the phone message or the words he said. I wasn't thinking about the other woman, or the boy, or the years I had spent arranging my life around someone who no longer cared for me. I was thinking about the carpenter's daughter who had learned how to build quietly enough that no one heard the hammer until the structure stood taller than they expected. I wasn't frightened about the next steps because I had already taken them. Long before he told me to know my place, I had created one. The house was under my name and trust because I had inherited the original down payment from my father's estate. The cars were registered to the LLC that I controlled, not us. The joint savings were never truly joint. He never contributed to them. The investments every rental property, every long-term bond ladder, every dividend stock were tied to tax shelters Richard didn't understand and didn't bother to ask about. All because he assumed I wouldn't know how to manage money. He saw me balancing checkbooks and thought I was just organizing groceries. He didn't know I was reading the market like a silent chessboard. He didn't know the accountant I visited quarterly was the same man who handled my father's business, not his. He didn't know I kept receipts, not out of necessity, but documentation. He didn't know that the softness in my voice had teeth. I had already moved everything into position, carefully, legally, cleanly. Not for revenge. For freedom. So as I lay there listening to the faint hum of the motel heater, I didn't feel empty. I felt ready. Ready to step into a life that had room for me in it. Ready to let go of a marriage that had ended long before that text ever arrived. Ready to stand on the foundation I built with my own 2 hands, just the way my father taught me. Slow. Steady. Strong. The world outside the motel room had already crossed into a new year. So had I. Morning came slowly in that motel room. Not like sunrise at home where the light filtered through the sheer curtains Richard liked because they looked elegant. Here, the sun pushed in hard and direct lighting every corner of the place like it had nowhere else to go. I lay still for a moment, listening to the quiet hum of the old heater, the faint traffic rolling by on the highway outside, and the steady rhythm of my own breathing. I checked my phone not out of hope, just out of habit. No messages from Richard, none expected. I didn't text him either. Instead, I scrolled through the photographs I had taken over the last 2 years. I never hired a private investigator. Didn't need to. People who believe you depend on them don't bother hiding very well. Screenshots of credit card charges to restaurants we never went to. Pictures of hotel receipts emailed to our shared inbox. Messages I forwarded quietly to a private folder. Records of nights he claimed to be working late, time-stamped against GPS logs from our shared family phone plan. I wasn't collecting evidence for court. I was collecting truth for myself. The truth was simpler than betrayal usually is. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't tragic. It wasn't even passionate. It was ordinary, predictable, almost boring. He met her the way people meet each other every day at work. Her name was Sabrina. She had been hired at Richard's firm 2 years earlier, young, bright, quick to laugh, and eager to be known. I didn't know much about her the first 6 months. Just a name here, a story there. A joke at dinner he thought was harmless, but familiarity has a tone, and I heard it before I understood it. Then one afternoon, I saw the way he checked his phone when her message came through. Not urgent, not businesslike, tender, subtle. A softness I recognized because I used to be the one it was meant for. The shift was small and slow and terribly obvious once I saw it. I didn't confront him then. I didn't scream. I didn't accuse. I listened. I observed. And over time, the truth walked its way out into daylight, like my father said it always would. The first time I saw Sabrina was at a local cafe. I had gone there to meet a contractor about a renovation project. She was at the next table, her son coloring quietly beside her. She didn't know me. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. I just watched the way she tucked his hair behind his ear, the way she said, "Hold on 1 second, sweetheart," before answering her phone. It was Richard calling. Her face changed when she saw the name on the screen. Not guilt. Expectation. This wasn't an affair built out of secrecy. This was a relationship she believed had a future. In that moment, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel threatened. I didn't feel replaced. I just felt sad. Sad for a woman who had built her hopes on a man who traded one home for another, like it was as simple as rearranging furniture. Sad for a child who didn't ask to be pulled into someone else's lies. Sad for the years Richard and I had spent building something that turned out to be so fragile it couldn't survive the weight of ordinary life. I left the cafe quietly. And that night, I took the first steps that would become my exit. I met with my lawyer, an older man with white hair and a voice like gravel, the same one who had handled my father's business affairs. He didn't look surprised when I asked him how to legally separate finances without triggering alarm. "Been waiting for this conversation for a while," he said. Not unkindly. I met with my accountant, a gentle, soft-spoken woman who had taught me more about tax code than most college courses could. She didn't blink when I handed her the list of LLCs and trusts I wanted reassigned. "Clean work," she said. "You planned well." I met with the contractors who managed my properties, Gary and Luis, two men who had become something close to family over the years. They didn't gossip, they didn't pry. They just nodded when I asked them to direct checks into the new trust account. People who work with their hands understand quiet loyalty better than most. By the time New Year's Eve came, the structure was already in place. Titles transferred, deeds recorded, joint accounts unwound, beneficiaries updated, legal notifications mailed, all timed carefully, all done within the bounds of the law, all clean, all final. Not a single thing was taken from Richard. Everything simply reverted to its rightful owner. You can't lose what was never yours. And Richard, for all his pride, had never paid attention to the details of his own life. He had assumed that because I stood beside him, I belonged to him. He had assumed that because I was gentle, I was weak. He had assumed that because I didn't speak, I didn't know. But gentle is not weak. Silent is not unaware. And patience is not submission. I left the motel around noon that day and drove to the house he shared with Sabrina. I didn't go inside. I didn't knock. I didn't want a confrontation. I just sat across the street in my car and watched him carry groceries up the front steps. He looked ordinary, tired, human, smaller than the idea of him I had once loved. Sabrina came to the door, laughing at something their son had said. She leaned into Richard. He kissed her lightly, the kind of kiss that's comfortable, not hungry. Families are made in these small gestures, and some families are built on lies. I didn't hate them. I didn't envy them. I didn't want him back. I just finally saw him clearly. And seeing clearly is a kind of peace. I drove away without him ever knowing I was there. The life he had chosen didn't belong to me. And the life I had built didn't belong to him. Two quiet truths passing each other like cars on a country road. No collision, no drama, just distance. And ahead of me, a long, open stretch of highway. And a future that finally had room for me in it. I didn't return home right away. I gave myself a week long enough for Richard to believe the silence was temporary, long enough for him to feel certain that I would walk back through the door and slip into the shape he had grown comfortable with. People who rely on others to bend rarely imagine a world where the bending stops. During that week, I stayed in a rental house near Jordan Lake. A quiet place, wood-paneled walls, the scent of pine and old stone fireplaces. I spent evenings sitting on the small back porch, watching the sun wash the surface of the lake in gold. I read. I cooked simple meals. I walked along the trails with my phone turned off. I didn't ask myself what my life would look like now. I already knew. On the 7th day, Richard called. Not angry, not apologizing, just irritated like someone whose routine had been disrupted. "Helen, come home," he said, as though I had simply stepped out to take in the mail. "We need to talk like adults." Adults. I let the words sit in the air for a moment. "Sure," I said. "We should talk. Meet me at the bank tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock. He paused. I could hear him shift, adjusting to a moment he hadn't expected. "Why the bank?" "I'll explain there." He didn't object. He thought he was still steering the wheel. He always thought that. The next morning was crisp, the kind of winter cold that wakes you fully the moment it hits your lungs. I wore a long camel coat, kept my hair tied back, no makeup beyond a light gloss. I looked like myself, not the self I had been performing as his wife, but the self I recognized in mirrors before we married. Richard stood in the bank lobby, tapping his foot, scrolling his phone. He looked impatient, annoyed, perhaps a little anxious, but only in the way someone gets when they are inconvenienced. "Helen," he said, forcing a tight smile, "are you done with whatever this little episode was?" Episode. I didn't answer. Instead, I nodded to the bank manager, Mr. Calloway, a man in his early 60s with a soft voice and sharper understanding than most people ever recognized. He had been my guide through the process of restructuring our finances these past years. He greeted me warmly, Richard politely. We sat down in a private office, glass walls, polished table, and a tissue box placed at one end. People always expect crying in these moments. The tissue box remained untouched. Mr. Calloway opened a folder thicker than most legal files. As requested, we're here to review the finalized account transfers and property title records, he said. Richard's head snapped up. Transfers property titles. What transfers? I folded my hands. The house is held in the Carter family trust, I said softly. It always has been. It was purchased using funds inherited from my father. You never contributed to the purchase, so it remains solely in my name. He stared. That's not possible, my name is on the deed. It was, I replied. It was removed legally 9 months ago. You signed the paperwork. You thought it was refinancing documents. His breath hitched. I didn't smile. The vehicles Mr. Calloway continued turning a page are registered to Carter Holdings LLC, which is owned entirely by Helen. The joint savings account he went on was never joint in the legal sense. The deposits over the past 7 years have come exclusively from Helen's business accounts. Therefore, it is considered separate marital property. Richard's voice rose too loud for the small room. I paid for everything. The house, the bills, the life we had. This is insane, Helen. I didn't flinch. No, Richard. You paid the visible bills, the ones people can point to and say, he provides. I paid for the property taxes, the renovations, the insurance policies, the investments, the emergency funds, the repairs, the contractors, the future. You took credit for what I maintained. He blinked. His face flushed red, not from shame, but disbelief. The world he thought he understood was unspooling thread by thread right in front of him. Look, he said, voice softening, switching tactics the way people do when they feel control slipping. We don't have to do this. We can work through things. I made mistakes, yes, but we can... I shook my head once slow. There is nothing to work through. The marriage has been over for a long time. I just needed to make sure I walked away clean. He leaned back in his chair. A long, stunned silence settled between us. Then he asked almost in a whisper, So what do I have left? I met his eyes, not cruel, not triumphant, just honest. Your job, your choices, your new family, the life you picked when you believed I had no power. He looked smaller then. Not weak, just real. The performance had fallen away. The charm, the posture, the confidence all gone. What sat across from me was a man who had never learned to build anything that could stand without someone else holding the weight. When we stepped out of the office, the lobby felt too bright. Too open, too public. He followed me to the parking lot. The cold air cut between us. Helen, he said, his voice cracking around the edges. I didn't know you were capable of this. I paused with my hand on the car door. That's because you were never looking, I said. Not at me, not really. No anger. Just truth. And truth is its own kind of quiet mercy. I got into the car, closed the door, drove away. No fireworks. No celebration. Just a calm, steady exhale, like the first breath after surfacing from deep water. I had not won anything. I had simply reclaimed what was mine. I didn't cry after the bank meeting. Not in the car, not in the rental house, not in the days that followed. People think tears are what prove something mattered, but that's not true. Stillness can be grief. Quiet can be release. A steady breath can be the body finally understanding it is safe. I spent the first few days after the confrontation cleaning the little rental house, not because it was dirty, but because movement helps the mind settle. I wiped down counters. I laundered towels that were already clean. I opened windows in the morning, even when the air bit cold against my skin. The house smelled like pine and winter sunlight. In the afternoons, I walked by the lake. The path curved along the waterline bare trees, lining the trail like quiet witnesses. Some afternoons, I brought a thermos of tea. Some afternoons, I brought nothing at all. I let my feet carry me at their own pace. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't hurrying anywhere. I could hear my father in the back of my mind, his voice steady. When something ends, don't rush to fill the space. Let the space breathe. I didn't rush. Meanwhile, life moved forward without my effort. Richard moved out of my house within days. He didn't call again, not at first. I heard from mutual acquaintances whispers that he was staying with a coworker. I didn't correct them. I didn't owe anyone my side of the story, and I didn't need theirs. The truth always settles eventually, like dust in a shaft of light. One morning, I drove back to the house for the first time. I let myself in with my key. The air still held the faint scent of rosemary from the plant I kept in the kitchen window. The rooms were quiet. The silence didn't feel empty. It felt peaceful. I walked through, slowly taking in each corner, as if reacquainting myself with a place that had been waiting. I ran my fingers along the hallway wall, the one with the small dent from when we'd moved in a dresser during our first week here. I touched the kitchen counter where I used to knead dough on Sunday mornings. I stood in the living room and looked at the sunlight shifting across the hardwood. Nothing in the house had changed. I had changed. I made myself tea and sat at the dining table, the same table where I had once set 2 champagne flutes. I didn't feel sadness there. I didn't feel anger. I felt something like returning. Later that week, I drove to visit my father. He lived in a small retirement community, about an hour out in a quiet town, surrounded by fields that rolled out like long, slow breaths. When I walked into his room, he was sanding a small piece of oak, his hands slow with age but steady. He looked up and smiled. "You did it," he said. No explanation needed. I sat down beside him. He handed me another piece of sandpaper, just like he used to when I was a child. We worked in silence. The only sound was the soft rasp of paper against wood grain. After a long while, he spoke. "You handled it with dignity." "I didn't want a war," I said. "No," he replied. "You wanted your life back. War is for people who are still fighting to prove something. You didn't have anything to prove." I swallowed. That was it. That was the core of it. I had not fought for victory. I had not fought for revenge. I had fought for self-respect quietly, patiently, thoroughly. My father moved in with me 2 weeks later. Not out of necessity, out of choice. He said the retirement community was too quiet. I didn't argue. His presence filled the house with something I hadn't realized. I missed steady company, the kind that doesn't take anything to maintain. We settled into a soft routine. Mornings with coffee on the back patio, afternoons tending to the small garden behind the house, evenings where he worked on small woodworking projects in the garage while I reviewed rental agreements and property invoices at the kitchen table. Life didn't feel like it had been rebuilt. It felt like it had been unburdened. As for Richard, word travels quietly in towns like ours. I learned months later that things hadn't gone well. Sabrina struggled with the reality of their relationship when it was no longer in the shadows. Bill's childcare expectations. Life doesn't work on fantasy hours. The cracks showed. The arguments followed. Eventually, he moved into a modest apartment closer to his office. I heard he stopped going out with coworkers, stopped laughing the way he used to, stopped being the man who always had a story to tell. One afternoon, I saw him at the grocery store. He was standing in the cereal aisle, staring at boxes as if waiting for instructions. He looked older, smaller. The kind of tired that doesn't come from lack of sleep, but from life no longer matching the image in your head. He saw me. I didn't look away. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel pity. I felt release. He had made his choices, and I had made mine. The things we build with care endure. The things we build on illusion fall apart. That is not tragedy. That is simply honesty. I drove home afterward, the late afternoon sunlight slanting across the windshield. My father was on the porch, whittling a small piece of pine. He looked up when I pulled in, his eyes warm. "You okay?" he asked. "Yes," I said, "I am." And it was the truth. Not spoken for reassurance. Spoken because I had finally come home. It was early spring by the time Richard reached out. The air had begun to soften the trees, just starting to push pale green leaves back into the world. My father and I were on the back porch, sanding the arms of an old rocking chair we found at a yard sale. The wood was good beneath the wear, just needed patience. Most worthwhile things do. My phone buzzed once in my pocket. I didn't check it right away. I finished smoothing the grain beneath my palm, then wiped the dust from my hands before looking. It was Richard. No long message, no apology typed out in paragraphs. Just, "Can we talk?" I stared at the text for a moment. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because I wanted to feel the truth of it fully before I acted. My father looked up at me, saw the expression on my face, and nodded slowly. "Take your time," he said. But I didn't need time. I replied, "Yes, 3 p.m., the diner on Maple. Neutral ground, public, simple, no room for theatrics." The diner was just like it had always been, red vinyl booths. The faint smell of frying onions, the bell on the door that chimed every time someone entered. The kind of place where teenagers worked summer shifts and retirees came to drink coffee slowly enough to earn the right to stay for hours. I arrived a few minutes early and sat at a booth by the window. The sun shone in warm stripes across the table. I wrapped my hands around a mug of coffee, breathing in the steam. Richard walked in exactly on time. Not rushed, not frantic, just subdued. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically. More like someone who had been carrying a version of himself that no longer fit. He sat across from me. Didn't reach for my hands. Didn't pretend this was normal. "Thank you for meeting me," he said. I nodded. He looked down at the table for a long moment, as if gathering language that didn't come easily to him. "I owe you an apology," he said finally. I didn't answer. I wasn't going to make it easier. Truth needs room to rise on its own. He exhaled, shoulders dropping. "I lied to you. I betrayed you. I talked to you like you were small. And all that time you were the one actually holding everything together." There was no anger in his voice. Just something heavier. Something that took longer to lift. I thought you'd always be there," he admitted. "I thought you needed me." I looked at him, then really looked. The man who once stood so tall in his own reflection now sat trying to find words that didn't dissolve in his throat. "You didn't know me," I said quietly. "Not really." He nodded. "I know that now." We were silent for a moment. The waitress came by, set down silverware, refilled my coffee. Richard didn't order anything. He rubbed his hands together, fingers gripping and releasing, like someone wringing out unspoken thoughts. "I didn't think I was that kind of man," he said. "The kind who hurt someone who trusted him." "You weren't always," I replied. "But choices shape people. Over time, quietly." He flinched, not with pain, but with understanding. "I didn't realize how much of my identity was built on being admired," he said. "And when I didn't feel admired anymore, I looked for it somewhere else. I didn't ask why I needed it. I just chased it. There it was. The truth. Not an excuse. A mirror. People do not destroy their lives because they are evil. They destroy them because they are afraid of facing themselves." I took a slow sip of coffee. "I don't hate you," I said. He looked up. Shock flickered through his expression. He had expected anger, resentment, punishment. The world teaches us to believe closure must be loud. "I don't love you," I continued, my voice steady. "Not anymore. But I don't hate you. I don't carry you with me either way." He swallowed, blinked hard. "That's worse," he whispered. "No," I said gently, "that's peace." He leaned back, defeated not by me, but by recognition of himself. We sat there for a few minutes more, in silence, not uncomfortable, just inevitable. Two people acknowledging the shape of what had been. When he stood to leave, he hesitated. "Helen," he said, voice low, "I hope you find something better." I nodded. "I already have." His eyes searched mine, and he understood. It wasn't another person. It was myself. He nodded once, as if accepting a final truth, then walked out into the afternoon light. The bell above the door chimed once, then settled. I finished my coffee slowly. No tears came. There was no part of me reaching backward, no longing, no bitterness, just the warm clarity of a chapter closing exactly when it was meant to. When I stepped outside, the breeze was soft. The air smelled like early spring. I drove home with the windows cracked open, the sunlight flickering through the trees overhead. My father was sitting on the porch, rocking gently in the chair we'd restored. He looked at me, not asking for details, not pressing for meaning, just present. "Well," he asked. "It's done," I said. He nodded once. "Good." And we sat there, two chairs rocking side by side, letting the simplicity of the moment hold the entire weight of the past. Spring settled in slowly, like a gentle hand smoothing the edges of winter. The air grew warmer, the light grew longer, and the house began to feel lived in again, not because of noise or activity, but because of presence. Real presence. The kind that doesn't rush, doesn't grasp, doesn't demand. My father and I developed our quiet routines. Morning coffee on the back porch, listening to the birds start their day. He'd read the paper slowly, always front to back, while I reviewed property ledger statements or answered emails from tenants. Around noon, we'd work on small projects, refinishing a chair, repairing a cabinet hinge, planting herbs in old clay pots. Just steady, simple work. The kind that reminds you life is still made of ordinary things, not just turning points. People talk about rebuilding after heartbreak like it's some dramatic transformation. A phoenix rising a butterfly, emerging, a woman reborn from ashes. But that's not how it felt. I didn't feel new. I felt returned. Returned to myself. Returned to the quiet steadiness I had cultivated long before I ever met Richard. Returned to the belief that life is built one careful decision at a time, not in grand gestures, but in small, consistent acts of self-respect. There were nights when I thought of the marriage not with longing or regret, but like remembering a room I once lived in. The furniture, the colors, the sunlight in the evening, the corners I liked and the corners I avoided. It had been home once, and then it wasn't. Some endings don't require flames. Some endings are simply closing a door you've already walked through. One afternoon, I was sitting on the porch with my father sipping peach iced tea. The rocking chair we'd restored creaked softly beneath him. The air smelled like cut grass and warm soil. "You look lighter these days," he said. "I feel lighter," I replied. He nodded, satisfied. "You carried more than your share for a long time." I didn't deny it. Not out of bitterness, but because it was true. "When your mother died," my father continued, "I didn't know what to do with the hurt. So I built things. Tables, shelves, porch railings. None of them fixed the grief. But they gave the grief somewhere to go, something to shape itself into." He paused, letting his words settle. "You shaped yours into a life." I swallowed past the small tightness in my throat. "I had you to learn from." He smiled, not big, not wide, just the smallest shift of warmth in his eyes. And that was enough. A few weeks later, I drove out to one of my rental properties, a small cafe space in town. The owner, a woman named Lila, ran a bakery there. She was wiping down tables when I walked in, flour dusted across her forearms, her hair pulled back with a pencil. She looked up and grinned. "You're early. I just pulled cinnamon rolls from the oven." I sat at the counter and watched her move steady, practiced, joyful. Someone building a life with her own hands. "I heard about what happened," she said, gently sliding a warm plate toward me. I nodded. People always hear. Small towns are built of quiet echoes. "You seem okay," she added. "I am," I said, and I meant it. She smiled like she could tell. "You know," she said, pouring coffee, "a woman came in here last week crying about a breakup. She said she felt stupid for trusting someone. I told her trusting isn't the mistake. Staying where you're diminished is." I sat with that for a moment. "Yes," I said softly, "that's it exactly. Trust is not weakness. Hope is not foolish. Love is not naive. But staying where you are not seen, that is the wound. Walking away is the healing." Months passed. The house bloomed with summer. My father built planter boxes for the porch. I repainted the kitchen cabinets a soft olive green. We replaced the old dining table with one we made ourselves. The wood smooth under our hands, the grain warm and full of story. Sometimes I ate dinner alone on the porch, the cicadas humming softly in the trees. Sometimes I invited neighbors over for iced tea and slow conversation. Sometimes I simply sat barefoot, watching the last of the sun drift behind the pines. Peace has a sound, I realized. It is quiet, steady breathing. It is the soft knock of a hammer on wood. It is a door that no longer needs to be closed to feel safe. And now I speak to you. Not as a woman who lost something. Not as a woman who conquered something. But as a woman who chose herself when she finally remembered she could. If someone listening to this is standing in a life where they feel small, unseen, spoken over, or spoken down to, listen. You do not have to rage. You do not have to prove. You do not have to break. You only have to choose yourself. Quietly, steadily, patiently, like sanding a piece of wood until the grain shows again. And when the time comes, walk out the door, not to escape, but to return home, to the place inside yourself where your worth has always lived. If this story touched something in you, take a breath. Share this with someone who needs it, and remember your life is still your own to build. The end.